Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And from time to time, you get to a passage in the Bible where you're like, you know what? There's a lot of layers here in terms of meaning. And I think if we pick at it and we look at other parts of the Bible and we look at the Old Testament and we think about what the author of the book we're looking at is going for and what they tend to do in other situations, we can get to the bottom of it. And I think we can get to the bottom of it with this tricky passage in Matthew 27 that describes people coming back to life. Jesus cries out in a loud voice. He gives up his spirit. So Jesus is dead on the cross. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. I don't think that one's that tricky. The earth shook and the rocks split. Seems like a pretty straightforward thing. But then verse 52, the tombs broke open and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs, and after Jesus' resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many people. The last couple of days, we've been talking about Ezekiel 37. I don't remember if we hit on the stuff in Daniel and Isaiah that points to this as well. I think we had a nod to a couple of the stories involving resurrection in 1 Kings, 2 Kings. The point is, this is an Old Testament idea. Jewish belief had definitely come to a point of saying, all right, somehow resurrection of the dead is a sign of the end of things, the coming of the Messianic kingdom. There was some kind of expectation of that. And the way that Matthew is paying all of that off right here in the context of the other payoffs that deal with the problems that are set up from the very beginning, the problems of sin and death and separation from God, all of that, I think, theologically works. I think we have gotten to the bottom of it. Even with difficult passages, I don't think it's usually that tough, because of how beautifully written the Bible is, to go and look at even just the level of narrative payoff. And I think we can get to the bottom of that here too. This idea that Jesus was somehow tinkering by merit of his existence with the boundaries between life and death, with the idea of the dead being dead and the living being living. That's all over the book of Matthew. I mean, think about his answer to the question about who's going to be married to who at the resurrection. Remember the Pharisees and Sadducees, whichever group it was this time around? I think it would have been the Sadducees, because it was about resurrection, which they weren't excited about. They didn't believe in. Remember, they came to him and they're like, imagine that some lady gets married and then her husband dies and then she starts marrying all the brothers and they all die. And to try to make a farce of the idea of resurrection, they're like, so who's she going to be married to in the afterlife? And Jesus very famously says, you're in error because you don't know the scriptures or the power of God. At the resurrection, people will neither marry or be given in marriage. They'll be like the angels in heaven. But about the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what God said to you? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Jesus is messing with their paradigms here. And he's saying, don't think of the people who are asleep in God, who were the holy, the righteous people who came before, the people who feared God, the people listed in that hall of fame of faith that we get over in Hebrews 11. If you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe grab a Bible when we're done and just go read Hebrews 11. You'll figure out the connection real quick. It seems like remarks like this are Jesus saying you're thinking about the whole living and dying thing wrong. In God's eternal kingdom, this thing operates very differently. It's not just resurrection. There's eternal life. You're talking about a God who operates outside of time and is master of life, death, time. That would make sense. It also seems like Jesus and God are tinkering with the whole divide between life and death thing in Matthew 17 at the Transfiguration, where people are supposed to be dead show up and they're chit-chatting and having conversations, and they even all have an opportunity to roll their eyes together at Peter for not getting what's going on. That's implied. I don't know if it's actually straight up legitimately in there. And so sometimes we're a little bit spoiled. We're a little bit ruined to the text because we've got all this osmotic knowledge and assumption that we've gained over the years from just being around the Bible and this story a little bit. But imagine reading this for the first time in the first century in the context of the things that we've referenced back to over the last couple of days in the Old Testament about life, death, and resurrection and what happens in the end times and when the kingdom is established. Imagine reading that for the first time, and you get all of these little jabs, all of these little pokes, all of these little flags that pop up as you're working through Matthew for the first time about resurrection. Like a girl straight up came back to life. So that's pretty glaring, but there's more going on here than just a miracle one time where a girl comes back to life. The suggestion is that by the power of God, this is something that is very repeatable, and the will of God is that it would be repeated, that his glory would be demonstrated by the defeat of death. Well, if you're reading it that way, and then you get to Matthew 27, what are you going to want to know right after Jesus goes away? Well, does it still work? Is the deal still on? What about all that stuff? What about all those arcs that are still floating out there suggesting that death is defeated and that resurrection is a thing? So I say again, I think even in a difficult passage like this, we can get a pretty clear approximation of why it's in there and what it means and how it pays off the Old Testament and how it pays off narratively. I feel pretty dang good about where we're at with all of that. I'm not even troubled by the idea that Matthew is maybe going a little bit out of chronological order here, as he is wont to do from time to time, editorially to make his point so that he lines up a detail right alongside the tension that makes that detail pop or makes it pertinent. Because this resurrection thing, it looks like happens a little bit later than immediately after this earthquake and the rocks splitting and the temple tearing. It's possible that this whole thing takes place closer to the resurrection a couple days later, or that this whole thing is somehow initiated, that graves opened up here, but that people weren't coming back to life until later. Now, look, I understand how absurd that sounds, and that brings us back to the tension that I'm trying to lean into and set up here very slowly, which is, I think we can make sense of where this fits theologically and how it works in the narrative. That doesn't make it any easier to make sense of what a difficult claim this is. It's one that violates all of the rules of everything we know about life and death at the most basic level. And it also pushes us really hard in terms of questions about history and things that probably would get recorded. I mean, I'm going to spoiler alert you here. There's no thing coming where now I get out my little, let me just reach over here so you can hear it, Josephus book that's got this hardback cover and these really thick pages that I flip through all the time. I'm like, hey, remember Josephus, the first century extra-biblical historian? Well, guess what? The Bible's about to look awesome because this guy who didn't even like the Bible is about to corroborate a bunch of details. No, that's not coming. Josephus doesn't mention this one. Pliny doesn't mention this one. Suetonius doesn't mention this one. It seems to slip Philo's mind and a whole bunch of these other ancient historians who were writing about these things. Only Matthew catches this detail and gives it to us. Well, understandably, some people are going to look at that and say, I'm pretty sympathetic to the Bible. Seems like there's a lot of wisdom, truth in there, and I think everything that we need to understand Christ and God is in there. It is sufficient as a pointer to Jesus. And that is clearly a historical fabrication. It's a non-literal event that the modern reader is misinterpreting as being literal. And as a result, that causes some confusion. But this hypothetical person can look at it all and say, I don't need that to have literally happened. Somehow Matthew's just making a point about theological resurrection and how that works. Well, other people are going to look at that, and I'm inclined to admit that I'm more in this camp and say, it seems like Matthew just keeps telling us things that actually happened, though. He hasn't changed his voice or his style here. And if you haven't really looked closely at Matthew, well, then sure, yeah, it's an old document, whatever, he just did whatever he did. But you and I have looked at it really closely. Does it seem like Matthew just departs from stuff once or twice here or there? Or does it seem like he's holding this out as stuff that actually happened? Well, to me, it seems like the latter. And to me, it seems like the theological payoff here is a lot more effective if some people who were dead actually came back to life. Now, Jesus is about to. And that's pretty much the cornerstone assumption of Christianity is that he actually did. So my biases, as we talk about this more tomorrow, have to be disclosed. Where I'm coming from is I think something like this happened. To what degree? That's hard to know, but I think we can reason our way backwards to understanding a little bit more about what actually went down here. And I think we can reason our way to thinking through why there would be an absence of historical record on such a historically remarkable claim. I've heard so much positive, kind, exciting feedback from so many of you about the announcement of the new series that starts on January 2nd, a couple months from now as I'm recording this. Once again, if you haven't heard, we're going to do a 1 day per book of the Bible walk through the Bible to try to get a big sense of how it all hangs together, what all of the books do. I know we've all got dark spots in our knowledge of certain books where we just kind of mumble when people bring them up. It's like, Nahum naturally is, his name was Nahum, in the Bible, God, prophet, Israel, something niner. Because we don't know, and it's okay that we don't know, but I think we can fill in a whole bunch of gaps together in the first quarter of next year, starting on January 2nd. So again, we'll wrap up Matthew the last weekday of this year, and then we'll have a weekend, and then we'll just start with the new thing. And it just means so much to hear that you're excited about it. I mean, nobody's been like, "It's stupid, don't do it." No, everybody has been really pumped about it, and that energizes me. So just thanks a ton for the really kind feedback. And thanks also for thinking in advance about people you can invite to be a part of this thing. And of course, there's no greater honor, no greater compliment that you can pay me than to go and vouch for me, to put your name next to my name, your reputation next to mine. I get what a big deal that is. Thanks for even considering it. More on this people coming back to life thing tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.